Welcome back, everybody, to the Living Streams Church podcast. Another week, another podcast. We've been doing pretty good with these podcasts for almost a year now, I think.
Yeah.
Is it a year? Maybe not.
Yeah,
but
it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been fun. This is the 2025 version of Alec right here.
How's it going?
The two baby dad.
Yep.
Alec version.
Two babies.
The new house, all done, bathrooms finished version. Nope.
all is wrong, but
Not all done. You do have some winter lawn? Oh, that died too?
you can't call it a lawn.
Dude, he has enough winter lawn to make up for 3 or 4 lawns.
I planted seeds and never mowed.
Oh.
And
it was good.
Now I got crusty, not mowed. But I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that when I did it. It was just like, this is better than dirt.
Yeah.
I got no time to take care of it.
Yeah. Now it's freezing.
Yeah. So it's there, there's
Yeah.
it doesn't count as a lawn.
Well, and then we have the Dan Riccio, who has been on the podcast many times.
Number of times, and I've planted winter grass and my sprinkler controller box died. So 4 days later, I was like, oh, I just wasted all that money.
Oh, no. So it's gone?
No, replanted and spent more money, and half of it grew. So
Yeah.
How's your lawn?
My lawn's actually doing great. It, right now it stops growing because it's cold, but it still looks great. And today, actually, my sprinklers hit this one part of my sidewalk, and I was actually, we had a bunch of parties over the holidays, and so I was bringing chairs back to the church. So I was loading the truck, and I was carrying them, and I hit that little puddle part on the sidewalk. Zoom! Just started sliding because it was totally frozen. Didn't fall, luckily, but it was real dumb looking, I'm sure.
Oh.
Yeah, so with that being said, we're going to jump into our fasting and prayer season, prayer and fasting. For some reason, I always say fasting and prayer, but prayer comes first. It's
because we used to say fast pray.
Oh, maybe that's
that was
why.
the series title for years.
Yeah, which this has been going on for over a decade, I think. Yeah. We've been doing this, kicking off the year with a prayer and fasting season. And so it's mainly a prayer season where we're seeking the Lord, trying to hear from the Lord, trying to make more room in our weekly schedule for the Lord, for Encounter the Lord. We're trying to put in place some spiritual practices, which is a newer, we've kind of added more than just fasting. Like, hey, this is a time to kind of get your spiritual practices out, whatever those might be. Maybe you need to try a little more Sabbath. Maybe you need to try a little more silence. Maybe you need to try a little bit more Bible reading, other things, but kind of get on track with those things again, creating space for encounter with God. But then we add fasting to that, which is just no one's favorite thing to do. You like fasting?
I like the 3-part. Shouldn't we do eat, pray, fast?
Yeah.
That's where it broke.
That's
and
what it was.
Didn't work
Eat,
anymore.
pray, love that's why we did it. Eat, pray, love was still cool.
That's funny.
When we were calling it fast, pray, insert different word every year.
And our prayer and fasting season, interestingly enough, you got to give credit where credit is due. We were in a pastor's meeting a long time ago, and we were kind of going around and around and around with ideas, and the little Alec Seekins, little baby Alec Seekins. I mean, what, you were probably 21 at the time?
Yeah, something like that.
Alex,
early 20s.
And he said, hey, what if we kicked off every year with kind of a real season of fasting and praying, kind of 21 days like Daniel was fasting and praying before the message came from the angel. And it was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's try it. And here it is. Over 10 years later, we're still doing it. And it's been so meaningful for our church family.
Been good.
For sure.
Well, what it was we had just spent a bunch of energy on a building fund thing that we had a third party come out for, and it just left a bad taste in our mouth. Like it felt,
this is not us. Yeah.
It felt so weird, and it was just a sense in the room of like, we should have just prayed and fasted instead of pulled in these people who were going to help us get a bunch of money and and then it's which is interesting in hindsight because we just did the closest thing to a building fund that we've done since then, and it did not feel weird. It felt good actually. Like I feel like this anniversary celebration fund has been not like a which it can so easily feel when a church is like, hey, we're trying to raise money. It actually really felt like spiritual discipline and practice and formation and the Lord moving and you did a really good job with that, David.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely prayer led and tried to not go outside of who the Lord's made us to be. And So, but yeah, so we kicked this one off. What you guys have been? You've been here for how long? You been coming to your church here, Dan? Long time.
39 years ish, 37, something like that.
Wow, 37, 39 of 40.
Yeah.
So you pretty much got all of them. How about you, Alec?
Well, since I was 3, and I think I'm 35.
Yeah.
32, so you got me beat.
Dang,
But
man.
you cheated. You came out of the womb first.
Head start.
And I was there in the beginning, 1984.
Yeah.
But then we took a hiatus for 10 years or so, and then back. So I've still got my 30. I think I'm in the 30s. Yeah. Maybe.
And I had some gap in between where I went to different church or things like that with my family.
But you've been through a lot of prayer and fasting seasons. So has there been one in particular that stands out to you, or what's kind of your experience as people are listening and maybe this is their first one, or maybe they're trying to get some encouragement to actually give it a go? What's the 21 days in January been for you guys?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like a story from one of our prayer and fasting times, other than it's just a valuable discipline every year. I think there's so much that comes with fasting. I mean, the immediate like drawing nearer to the Lord you get, but then like kind of the wax on, wax off effect that you get a little bit of like learning to say no to things even that are good because they get in the way, which then strengthens your muscles of learning to say no to things that are not good.
Yeah.
It's and even on a practical level, like it's had impact on some of that stuff. Like I remember the first year, the most difficult thing the Lord ever asked me, I think, to fast from during that season was meat one year, because I'm a meat guy. And back then I was like a only meat guy.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to die. Like, I don't know what I'm going to eat for a month. And it was weird to get to the end of that and be like, it wasn't a big deal. I don't know, just a very practical shift of like, oh wait, I could like change diet pretty easily, and that thing that feels like something I need is not something I need.
Yeah.
And then a lot comes to that spiritually too, of realizing like, oh wait, I really need the Lord even more than that. But I
it's kind of dependency, right? Like you didn't realize how dependent you were on this thing and actually how little you needed
it. And I think for whatever reason, I don't know that I've come into a January in all these years with a major burning question that I needed clarity and direction for. So I don't know that this season, I know a lot of people end up, come into that. I think I need to process things when they happen. So like when there's a thing weighing on me, like I'm like, I got to go figure this out with the Lord. So that happens throughout the year more often than not for me.
What about you, Dan?
It is funny because it's like, I probably should have thought of this on the way here. I don't have any significant story of like, oh my gosh, this meant something really significant that sticks out in my memory. Just thinking back through any fast that I've done, I think relating to what Alex said in terms of just being like, especially if it's been like extended over more than just a couple days, like I think 3 is probably the longest I've ever fasted. So not to
3
try
days,
and it was like by the end of 3 days, it was like, I am so ready to eat and like my head hurts so bad. And, but just kind of being willing to go into this and go, I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't have to. And I just want to trust the Lord. And it's funny because I, just by analogy, like one of the things I do is I listen to a certain number of Psalms a day, usually while walking the dog. And sometimes something really significant happens in that where it's like, this is kind of me praying the Psalms or listening, praying. And sometimes something really cool happens in that. And sometimes nothing happens. But if I didn't listen to it, nothing would ever happen. Yeah. And I don't necessarily know what happens to me each time I listen to it. And one of the things that happens is just even in my prayer times, like I start praying Psalms without thinking about it. Like I'm gathering language for something as I'm doing a practice that I wasn't aware of what was going on while I was doing it. And so I think fasting can be kind of a similar thing where it's like, I couldn't detail to you what it's meant, but I know it's meant something. And it's kind of like with the spiritual practice and things, we're looking to create meeting spaces. And this is just another meeting space. And it's like, what might happen? I don't know. Yeah. Might be something crazy cool. It might be simple. It might be something that I'm just not aware of. And so I would have a bunch of those. I think the awareness
is a really big deal. Both of you kind of mentioned that, in passing where, for me, I think when I don't eat for a day or something like that, it's funny. It's like all these different things go on inside your body because physically you're experiencing these things. But even just, the thinking of, tomorrow not eating breakfast or lunch, I'm trying to think, okay, Lord, what other things do you want me to cut out right now? And it's so funny. I just become so aware of all the excess in my life.
That's a good point.
The excess food, the excess, wasting time, the excess busyness, like, why am I so busy? And it's not even like wasting time. I think you can think, oh, well, I should be praying in this hour instead of not praying. I'm not talking about that. There's some hours where you should just be stupid. You should just be goofing off. You should just be rolling around on the floor with your kids or your dog or something. So I'm not even talking about like wasting time, like, oh, I should need to be more productive for the Lord or something else. But I'm just the wasting time. A little confession here. It's funny that just going into this time, like last night, I had three of these little sandwich things that I was eating. After I ate two of them, I thought to myself, I don't need that other one. It was interesting. Just because we're in this season, I'm just heightened awareness right now. And then I ate it.
Yeah.
And I just was thinking, and then now I'm just thinking like, what? But again, it was like, that's excess. Like, and I was full. It tasted good, but I still just jammed another one down there.
Yeah.
And then this morning I woke up and, I was doing a couple things, but then I was on my phone and I was doing some necessary things, but then next thing I knew, I was on Instagram. And I have a timer on my Instagram that's like, after 15 minutes, it's like, you've hit your time limit.
Yeah.
And so I was just, whatever, I can't remember what I was doing. And I think I thought, oh, I'm interested on what's going on with the fires in LA. And so there were some things on there. So I think that's what got me in there. Next thing I know, the timer's like, your timer is up. And so I went, oh no. And I know that means 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Guess what? I was 15 minutes late to everything in my life today. But it's like, I never would have thought about that before, but now it's funny. This is all confession time right now too.
Yeah.
But what I want is that I want that awareness of the excess in my life. And just this season where I'm trying to, what do I add and what do I abstain from? Just the thought process of that is making me so much more aware, acutely aware of what's going on in my life, because ultimately everything is spiritual formation, right?
Yeah.
Everything is forming you or deforming you. And so to be so much more aware of what I'm taking into my body, what I'm taking into my mind, what I'm giving out, with my hands, the way my hours are structured. I don't know. So it's always been maybe more so than, some big epiphany or specific moment. I think we've had years like that where, Brittany and I were seeking the Lord, like, should we go away for another year? And then through this time, we, as a family sought the Lord and felt like the Lord spoke to it. Like, there have been specifics, but more than anything, I just love the heightened awareness that this time comes. And so in these times, like, not just these times, but you said you seek the Lord. When you have an issue, you just seek the Lord. You don't wait till January to seek the Lord. But what are some of those spiritual practices that have been most kind of edifying or helpful in your life? Kind of like the downstream practices they talk about. Like, what is there one? I mean, fasting, is that one of them? It sounds like both of you are like, not necessarily. What are some of the practices that bring the greatest opportunity for you to encounter the Lord, or that have been the most meaningful?
Yeah. Well, I do think fasting is an important one. Fasting is an easy one to not do often.
You're a Sabbath guy though.
But I was going to say that.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm set. But yeah, I do think fasting is way underutilized. I think we should fast more.
Well, early church, I mean,
every week.
It was every week. Was it Wednesdays and Fridays, I think?
Yeah, something like that.
And because they didn't want to do Tuesdays and Thursdays because that's when the Judaism fasting was going on. So they did Wednesdays and Fridays. Every Wednesday, Friday. It
was my junior year. I don't remember if it was a semester or the whole school year. But I did a bread only, I think it was bread only Tuesdays or something like that. And it was
Some
special.
people are like, bread only? I would love that.
Yeah. But it had to be lame bread. It was like, I think I got like the
donuts are bread in some categories.
The crusty French bread from Fry's. That was like I just pulled that out in the middle of school, because you just got it. When you're doing bread only, you just got to eat a lot, because I just need something in there to keep the away. But that was a really special year, or semester. I can't remember how long it was, And there is a lot of value to fasting. But yeah, for sure, I think Sabbath, if I had to pick one other than like talk to Jesus, which is kind of
like prayer,
pretty big deal, But like when we the kind of thing you think when you think of practice that isn't like obvious, spend time with the Lord, read the Word, pray. Like hopefully those are your bread and butter, and we all know that. But one outside of those very, very foundational, like you're not even following Jesus if you're not doing these things. I would say Sabbath. For sure. I mean, and I've talked
and what
about
is
that
the
on
Sabbath
here.
for you and Colleen and,
and
the boys at this point?
Yeah. So Sabbath these days, we do Friday night to Saturday night, which has actually been a really important
Friday
thing.
sundown.
Yeah.
Saturday sundown,
Which is so much more practical than you think. I just started doing it because it's what the Jews do. And then I realized very quickly, like that is so helpful and productive because it creates a hustle day on Friday, leading up to sundown as opposed to like, oh, I can just stay up a little bit later and get it done. It's like, no, sun goes down and
shut it down.
The way God has organized the universe is telling me stop. And it's not something I have control over, and it happens at different times during the year and you get way less time to get ready in the wintertime and stuff. And then I can do a little bit of work Saturday after sundown. I can clean the dishes, and I actually want to.
For me, I jam a little extra sermon prep Sunday after the sun goes down, Saturday after the sun goes down.
The only time of the week that I'm excited to do dishes is Saturday after sundown, right? But we'll do, when we're doing all of our things, which we don't because we're not super... we try to follow Jesus's lead, not be like overly ritualistic about it, but also lean into valuable traditions and rituals, right? So we'll do sundown. Colleen will light a candle. She'll sing the Shabbat blessing and then pronounce it in English over us. And then I'll pray for my sons. A prayer blessing over them. And then we have this big bucket. It's a big brass tub full of toys that are Shabbat toys for Silas that he only gets to play on Shabbat. Would you try to make them like the tier 2 to like his second favorite toys, right? Which we need to refresh them. He's gotten bigger than the toys in there, but so he's got a lot of fun things that make noise or whatever in there. And we'll sing the Shabbat Shalom song, and I'll go up like 8 octaves when we get to the Shabbat, all off key. Always Colleen's not, and we'll bring it out, and with the claps, we'll do that. I'll do that on the tub, on the drum. I'll like hit it with a hammer or something like that, and then we'll just dump all those toys out on the floor.
And the point of the special toys is you're trying to create delight.
Yeah, exactly.
That for your sons, there's delight in the Sabbath.
And Silas loves it. He loves the candle. He loves the toys. And so then we'll just, we won't do any work that doesn't sound like the thing that our soul wants to do, right? So sometimes I'll garden. Last week, I've been working on building a play place for Silas. And last week it was like, am I going to want to do that today? Is that going to be the fun, refreshing thing to do with my family? And it was. About halfway through the day, it was like, nothing sounds more delightful than getting out my power tools and building a slide with my son right now.
Yeah.
And
what about you, Dan? What are some practices or a practice?
It's funny because I feel like a recovering Sabbath person who growing up was told on certain Sabbaths because it didn't work very well. So just a handful of them. Go in your room, close the door, and be quiet. It's Sabbath.
Oh my gosh.
Not quite that bad, but it was pretty close to it. And I think it was like in Abraham Heschel's book that he talks about. This is not an interlude between weeks. This is a high point of a week that you look forward to. And it's like, oh, that's so cool how you guys are doing that.
It's a holiday every week.
Yeah, exactly. And
what's the book you were mentioning?
Abraham Heschel. It's a book on Sabbath.
The thing's just called Sabbath.
Yeah,
right?
probably Sabbath. But
always love to drop little resources in there for the people listening.
But I guess one of the practices I picked up just in a class that was on spiritual practices at about the time you did a sermon series on spiritual practices, solitude. And my form of it probably could look like a walk, but most often it's a bike ride with no podcast, no music, no whatever. And within like the class, it was kind of like you were supposed to do so many, times of practicing solitude. I still chose to do it on a bike, but the idea of it was like, this is not a prayer time, but it's a time of listening to your own thoughts in the presence of the Lord, like with an awareness of it. And it's something I would do for years anyways, but like be on a bike ride and just be like, get to the end of it. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff I thought about and all this. And it's like, now I can take that to the Lord in prayer. And so I think having some of those times where it's like not a podcast, no music, not listening to anything, and just doing something where it's like your mind is free to just kind of got all this stuff inside, let it come up, but do it with an awareness of the presence of the Lord. And then to be able to take those into the presence of the Lord. I think for me, just processing emotion that hasn't been processed, it's created a good space for that.
Yeah, I love that because sometimes when you're praying, you're fighting yourself nonstop. Like, get back on track, get back on track. But that's been a helpful thing for me by far, is just in some ways what you're doing is you're just letting your mind wander and kind of almost like defrag, right? Like a computer where it's just like,
it's a good analogy.
Okay, all the stuff going on, just start putting it into a folder to some extent. But then what I've noticed I'll do is then I can assess myself. Like after that time, wow, it seemed like this is the thing that I was really thinking about.
Why was I thinking about that?
Wow, I'm so scattered right now. I'm so wound up right now. And then to say, okay, Lord, here I am, super wound up, can't even calm down, stressed out about everything. Will you meet me here? Lord, here I am totally scattered. There's just way too many things and I'm a little lost. Will you meet me here? Lord, this one thing it's dominating my entire, will you meet me here? That's something that's been really helpful for me, especially at a sunset with my dog, just sitting up there and just going, okay, I'm not going to fight myself. I mean, I am praying,
sure,
because I'm opening myself up before the Lord, but it's like once that happens, then I'll pray at the end. And it's funny you say ride a bike, because I'll usually try and like run up a hill or something, or like run out in the preserve or whatever, like run up to the top, because then I'm out of breath and I can't really. Like, I'm just like, it's like I'm worn out, so I can't really win this battle. I can't force myself to do anything. So, that's interesting. That's really cool.
It's funny you're saying that. I had at one point, I think when I had just a year or two into marriage, for like a year, the Lord like just kind of very specifically gave me a lot of practices. And one of the most important ones, it was kind of on the back end of a time when I had been having a hard time carving out meaningful time with the Lord and actually being able to engage in that, which is, I found that's pretty normal at life phase changes, right? So I just got married, all of a sudden my whole life looks different, which obviously means my time with the Lord looks different. Or maybe not so obvious, because it always feels like a crisis every time that happens, right? But one of the things I felt the Lord tell me to do was actually to get up in the morning and spend about a half hour just reading a novel before I had my quiet time, which felt so backwards. I'm like, no, I can't read a book, a sci-fi book, about nothing before I spend time with the Lord. But I was just kind of wound up as what was going on. And I felt like, and I would have never thought that, but the Lord told me to do that. And what I realized really quickly is this is unwinding me so that I can rest in the Lord. It's like a segue from all the thoughts and all the business, like I get focused on this story and then I'm actually at peace, and then I can go and enter into his peace and really enjoy it.
But I like, it's interesting you say the sci-fi type thing too, because in some ways I feel like the Lord does use our imagination to speak to us.
Well, I'm just a nerd. I've loved sci-fi fantasy my whole life.
Well, then someone can say it's a novel approach.
Oh, there you go.
So anyways, spiritual practices, I mean, that's what this prayer and fasting season has become, is definitely a time to seek the Lord. Definitely a time to try and like orient ourselves into what the Lord's. We had the prophetic Sunday, 2 Sundays ago. This is a time where we're really seeking the Lord. We're trying to, I always feel like our appetites, our desires, our longings, that's such a huge part of who we are. But we're not really aware of those things all the time. We're kind of just more instinctual. We're doing these things, but there's a reason that we're doing everything that we do, is because there's some part deep inside of us that is longing for something. I love what Tim Keller, he talks about Rocky Balboa, and in the movie Rocky, he said basically, the whole premise of the movie is Rocky boxes to prove that he's not a bum. So he's actually training, he's boxing, he's doing all these things, he's yelling, Adrian, or whatever it might be. But the core premise of all of that is, whether Rocky understands it or not, that's really he's trying to prove he's not a bum. because of whatever reason. And I love looking deep into say, well, why am I doing these things? Why am I working this job? Why am I feeling this way? Or why do I do all these things? And this is kind of looking at, okay, what is the longings? What is the desires? What are the appetites that I have? And then in this prayer and fasting season saying, okay, I'm bringing these before you, Lord, because ultimately some of my appetites need to be cooled and some of my appetites need to be stoked, the ones that are leading me in the right ways. And so it's just a good year to start. And in some ways it's nice after Christmas because we let it all go at Christmas, man. We're eating everything. Our American way, we're so consumeristic at this point. Maybe not. It's funny. My wife, she loves gifts, but she loves giving gifts more than anything. So it's funny. When I think of her in particular, she's not consumeristic in the sense of like wanting to meet a need, but it's so funny. She just loves giving gifts to people so much that she's like, bam, bam, bam. So we're all in this mode, and then we start over. It's New Year, and I just love saying, okay, Lord, we're just going to quiet everything. We're going to still everything. We're going to actually weaken ourselves through fasting, weaken ourselves through, maybe engaging in a relationship that's a little bit been tough for you, just to say, look, because I want your strength. I don't want anything else. I want your strength. I want your appetites. I want your longings. So I think it's just such a great thing. And this year, Alec and I in particular, we thought, okay, well, what do we want to use as kind of a roadmap or a foundation for leading us through this time? And we looked to the Lord's Prayer, which doesn't seem that clever or anything, but
a pretty good,
but yeah,
good default.
Last year we looked at Jesus, and Jesus's time in the wilderness and what were the spiritual practices he was doing, which I thought was a really great study.
Yeah.
And this year we just thought, let's just go to the Lord's Prayer. But as we put the microscope on the Lord's Prayer, it was funny. We just how are we going to unpack this? Where we thought, okay, well, we see seems to be a little bit of an intro, the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then there was this kind of little, trifecta there in that next part where there's a give us, there's a forgive us, and then there's a deliver us.
Yeah.
That Jesus is teaching the disciples to pray to God in that way. And so we decided, let's do those 3 Sundays. Let's do give us this day our daily bread, Sunday 1. Forgive us our trespasses or debts as we forgive those who trespass against us or
our debtors.
And then the third one was lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And that was what we said was the 3 that we should really focus on. And interestingly enough, we had on Sunday we had a recording of someone praying the prayer Our Father in Aramaic, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then we went right into reciting the prayer. But then what was funny is we stopped the prayer right there at deliver us from evil, and you could just feel in the room everyone going.
Yeah.
Are we going to say the rest? For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, which would be like the outro or kind of the conclusion. But we didn't say that. And I quickly had to say to everyone before you shoot me or freak out too much, actually, that's not in the New Testament. That's not in the teachings of Jesus, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. That probably is something that's more taken out of a passage in 1 Chronicles, which means it's biblical and all those things, but it's not a part of the prayer
Chronicles
that Jesus taught. Chronicles.
Chronicles.
Yeah. So it was funny because everyone was like, and both you guys just said, and I mean, you guys are steeped in the scriptures as anybody in the world.
You got me.
Never thought about it.
And you're like, wait a second. Oh, that's true. And I mean, I feel like I remember seeing that before, but I'd never really so I've always kind of just thought, oh, maybe it's in the other, because there's Matthew's passage and there's Luke's passage, but both of them, and actually Luke has even less, I think, than Matthew.
Yeah.
But they both in there. So that was probably more something where they would say the Lord's Prayer as a part of their liturgy, however far back in church history. And then at some point they thought, oh, this is also a great prayer that we should also pray every Sunday or whenever they gathered. But they were back to back, and then at some point someone just thought they were together, and so that just went on forever to where now that's the Lord's Prayer, which is just so funny how easily that can happen. But clearly Matthew chapter 6 and Luke chapter 11, for thine is the kingdom, is not a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you got me. I was like looking it up. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It was really interesting though. That I mean, I realize. I mean, I don't. Maybe Dan will go down this rabbit hole. Maybe it's for another day when I looked at it. But once I realized that that's not there, and you top that section off, to me, I saw something of a chiastic structure, which is super nerd talk for there's symmetry in the Lord's Prayer that informs itself, which I thought was really interesting. And actually, the passage you were preaching on that,
unpack that chiastic. Go ahead and tell
we're going to do that.
Saw.
Oh, well, I got the right guy next to me, and I don't know that.
Well, specifically in what we just said, where do you see the chiastic?
Yeah,
structure?
so. And I'd have to hang with it a little bit more, but I saw actually the "Give us today our daily bread" as the center. So a chiastic structure, I think chiastic means ring or something. Is that right?
It's from the Greek letter chi, which has this sort of shape. So you'd have a stair-step structure going down, a center, and then you go back up. So you have A prime, B prime.
Yeah. So basically it means or a broader term that is a little more helpful sometime would be like Hebrew parallelism, because there are different structures that you could have, whereas chiastic is usually, I think, a specific structure. But what we're talking about, is like a structure of a passage of scripture that might be like A, B, C, B, A, right?
But the prayer is so familiar to people. So what are you seeing?
Yeah. So I saw our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Let's see. I got to look at it.
You can't remember what it was.
It was a fresh thought.
No, that's fine.
But the thing that is fresh enough for me was interesting to see. Usually the center of the chiastic structure is a really important component there that is illuminating the rest of it. I mean, it's all the A's are illuminating the A's, the B's, the B's. But that would put "Give us today our daily bread," I think, in the center of the chiasm. And I think what you taught was something I learned from another book too, or generally the sense of like, hey, this isn't like give us abundance. This isn't give us more. This is like give us the bread that we need today.
Yeah.
Give us no more, no less. I thought you did a really good job teaching that. And I think that that's something that you could see actually coloring the whole Lord's Prayer, right? It's our Father who we're talking to our Father who's going to give us what we need.
Well, Tim
no
Keller
more, no
did. He didn't use chiastic or the Hebrew parallelism, but for him, what he was saying is almost like you can't get to give us this day without first encountering Abba, the Father, without encountering His holy name and character, without encountering His will.
Yeah.
So it's like, once you've encountered those things, then give us, like go ahead and petition the Lord. But then even the forgiveness, which, sorry, I'm getting into next week or whatever. The forgiveness, you can't really get to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive until you've encountered the Abba Father, you've encountered His holy name, you've encountered His will, and then deliver us, the temptation. Like he's saying that those three that we've really focused on, they're all kind of cloaked in and clothed in and kind of oriented by this intro, these three things in the intro. So he was kind of going on the same direction you, but I think you're pushing a little further on it.
Well, that's what I love about the Hebrew parallelism is that our Western minds look at the beginning and at the end, and that's still very much there in Jewish literature. But it's always, Jewish literature is so much about weaving, right? And so you still have the intro and the outro that we pay attention to, but you also have the center, and then you also have those layers, those A-B layers, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's very much true.
Did it mess with you at all when you were thinking, like, obviously it doesn't change the Lord's Prayer or doesn't change the Lord or anything. But.
No, it's just one of those things where it's like when you read it, I'm used to that. And when we say it in church, I'm used to that, but never really thought to compare notes and go, wait, these are different. Like, when I'm reading it, it doesn't surprise me. When I'm saying it in church, it doesn't surprise me. And until someone says, hey, look at these next to each other, like the point of putting things in parallel. So you can pick, now I see things I didn't see before because there's a comparison going on. But and just, the foundation of it being resourced in a first person, personal, possessive pronoun, our Father, that right away, you're alluding to it and saying it like this is, connection and belonging. What's the basis of our prayer? It's the Father, not just a Father, our Father, not my Father, but I'm saying this in light of connection with others, like loving God and loving people, all resourced by the fact that it's a, plural personal pronoun where it's our Father, that it's willing to do that, then becomes the resource for all the other things you're talking about. So,
Yeah, and I love just that we talked about the genie versus the daddy, you know. And I remember you're a daddy prayer, like you say daddy.
Yeah.
Alec oftentimes has said that, and it's funny because I know that and I think that, but still for some reason I don't always go that way, and sometimes I feel a little funny with it, but I don't think I should. It's just the way it is, and in no way I think obviously you can get to a point where you're now being irreverent, or you're not taking the fullness of the reality of God. And sometimes I think that's been a little knock on the Christian church in America, is we personalize everything, or all of our songs are about God and me and God and what he's doing for me. And when somehow we become the center. And that's not at all what Jesus is teaching. It's not at all what you're doing when you pray. It's not at all, but it's just also saying, don't forget that God is not just some large, massive entity of energy out in the cosmos. He is, omnipresent. He is, eternal and infinite, but he's also like made it very clear that he wants to be in close relationship with you and wants to be your daddy.
Well, and that's because, my dad, who was a Hebrew nerd, always taught me like, hey, the Lord's Prayer doesn't start with Ab, which would be father. It starts with Abba, which is daddy. And there's a little nuance there, but
pater or
pater,
pater is the Hebrew word, but the possession.
Well, that's not Hebrew.
Well, Aramaic.
No, that's
Greek.
Yeah,
Greek.
that'd be Greek.
Oh yeah, that one's there. That one's Greek. Yeah, it's prayed in Aramaic.
Yeah.
We have a Greek translation.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that's pretty significant. Jesus was addressing the Father as Abba, and that's a pretty big deal.
Totally.
It's funny because it is like, the idea behind it is these are the most primitive sounds that someone makes, Abba, and which is funny because Jared Utterback, whose birthday was yesterday, spent 5 years in China. Yes, Jared, happy 50th.
But 50, that's a
50
big
for
one.
him. Yes, he's older than I am. But when he lived in China and learned Chinese, his kids called him Baba.
Yeah,
and
Baba in Indonesian.
And then my younger daughter, who had a pacifier, like, before she's old enough to really talk, Baba, that's the normal sort of shape of language. And so, some of it's rooted in the idea, like, this is the most primitive sounds we make.
Yeah.
This is
for daddy.
This is our...
And Jesus is not just saying, here's how I pray. He's saying, this is how you pray.
Yeah.
He's teaching us how you say Abba. Mm-hmm. You say Baba. You say daddy, Dada. Like you say that, and it's mind-blowing, because yes, Jesus is God's son, but then what Jesus is saying is, you guys, you fishermen from Galilee, you tax collector, these guys that they have, what are they? Nothing. And he's saying, you say daddy.
Yeah.
And out of all the things he could have said, Almighty One, Great One, Teacher, King, Ruler, but he picks Father.
Yeah. And what's interesting, that actually I have not, this is something I learned, and I'm sure I've talked about before when we were living in Indonesia, that I just haven't connected to this yet. But I think one of maybe the most profound thing the Lord showed me through living in Indonesia and just the culture there is that familiarity and on honor and respect, like, they're not mutually exclusive. I think our culture teaches us like they're separate, right? So if you're familiar with someone, you're not showing them honor. And if you're honoring someone, you're not. So like, you look at the way we use honorifics specifically, right? Like, we avoid honorifics in American culture, right? So your professors usually a lot of them don't prefer to be called doctor this or that. Some of them do, but we tend to kind of judge the doctors who want to be called doctor, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, your pastors prefer usually not to be called Pastor Stockton, and we don't call people Mr. this or actually, I think it was Dalton. You guys were over the other night. Was it you guys? And I was like talking to Silas, and I was like, oh, say hi to Mr. and Mrs. Davis. And they laughed, Was that you guys? Yeah. They were like, what do you mean, Mr. and Mrs. Davis? We don't do that in our culture because we want familiarity and closeness and connection. Yeah. But what I learned in Indonesia is they do both at the same time. So the word Bapak, which is, the same word for dad or father, it's a normal honorific. So when you see a random guy that you don't know, instead of saying, hey man, or hey dude, or hey sir, you'll call him Pak, which is just short for Bapak. and you're just calling him Father.
Yeah.
And it's showing honor, but also that they're showing familiarity and closeness too. It's saying, and the best way it was described to me is like the way you would like think of grandma or grandpa, right? And especially in a hierarchical culture or a matriarchal, patriarchal society, right? Like in a matriarchal society, grandma is still grandma, you know, but she's also the one in charge of the whole family. Grandpa in a patriarchal society, and societies can be both, and in a good sense, right, is the leader of the whole family, the whole clan, but he's also still grandpa, right? And I think that like we can be, it doesn't have to be irreverent in any stretch of the imagination. It can actually be incredibly honoring to call God Daddy, as intimate.
At the bottom line, that's what Jesus said. When you pray, you should say, because whatever Jesus thought that would do in our psychology as we pray, he was encouraging his guys to do that. So I think that's cool. One other discrepancy, you know, obviously we cut off what we felt like was part of the Lord's Prayer, but it really wasn't. For thine is the kingdom, is the Lord's Prayer is taught by Jesus to his disciples in two different places. Matthew chapter 6, where Matthew says it's part of the Sermon on the Mount, and then Luke chapter 11, where Luke is writing, and he says that one of his disciples said, "Will you teach us to pray?" And then Jesus goes and says, "This is how you ought to pray." And so which one was it? You know, which one really was it? But have you guys thought much about that?
I mean, my response to that everywhere it appears in the Gospels is if you know a teacher like me or Dan, our favorite thing to do is to say the same thing over and over and over and over. My poor wife hears me teach the same thing 1,000 times. And I'll be doing it until the day I die. She'll still hear the stuff I'm teaching today 40 years from now. And so Jesus was a teacher. And as a teacher, he would teach the same thing to different people. He'd also teach the same thing to the same people.
Repetition.
And we need that. So I mean, that actually has ring of truth to me so much, and not ring of like, well, when did he teach it? You think he taught it one time? No.
What do you think, Dan?
Another way to put that in shorthand is come to first service and second service sometime. You'll hear the same sermon, but it'll be different. Totally different. And yes, like one is the Sermon on the Mount, one's the Sermon on the Plain. And Jesus wasn't saying, pray these words. He was saying, pray this way. And so sometimes you kind of go like, all right, when you tell the story, it's kind of, who am I, where was I, and what did I do? And like, if that's the structure and that's the way that you're telling the story, if you're instructing like, okay, this is, you know, here's the core tenets of what I'm talking about, then Jesus, as an itinerant, teacher, would say similar things over and over again, and to try and make them line up and be the same thing in every place is like, no, try coming to first and second service. It's the same teaching, but it's not. There's always something different.
It's not a magical incantation, where you got to get the words right. It's like, here's a roadmap to approach your Father and to talk to him about the things that you want to
the truth
pray
is
about.
Matthew and Luke were completely different people doing completely different things. I mean, Matthew was actually there at the Sermon on the Mount. You know, he was actually there. And what we know of Matthew is he was an accountant and a tax collector, but he was probably someone that was very precise and got things in order and very, very that. Whereas Luke, who was a physician and somewhat of a researcher, it seems like, was going to interview people after the fact. Hey, what do you remember about Jesus? What experience did you have? And so maybe one of the disciples was saying, I asked Jesus to teach me one time, and Luke's recording that interaction. So there's a difference, but there's not a discrepancy in that regard. But yeah.
It just made me think of too, like one of the things so when I was younger, I got my pilot's license. I'm very inactive in it, but one of the things you learn to do is talk on the radio. And it was like, oh, this is overwhelming. And it was broken down in this way. Who are you? Who are you talking to? What do you want to do? And where do you want to go? And I was like, oh, I can do that. Now I have a vehicle with which to communicate. And Jesus was saying, when you pray, pray in this way. Who are we? We're children of our Father, and here's the things that, where we need to get to where we're going or whatever. But so it was just, this is a way to get the things from here to there that we want to get out.
And in there, we then, after introducing kind of prayer and fasting season and really interacting with the Lord's Prayer, we talked about, I just broke it up into another 3, give us this day and daily bread, and kind of unpacked each one of those things, what that means. And what was really meaningful for me was thinking about Jesus actually praying kind of in a similar form in the Garden of Gethsemane, the garden of his anguish, as well as the cross, where in the Garden of Gethsemane, he actually says, Father, like, Daddy, please take this cup from me. Like, give me relief from this. Give me another option, yet not my will, your will be done. And so you have him saying, Daddy, you have him dealing with God's will and his will. And then you have this give us, he's praying this thing. Today, I don't think I can do this, yet not my will. And just seeing him in that moment, of anguish and stress. And I know there's always, at church, there's always people that are dealing with some really heavy stuff, but this prayer can be such a great vehicle to encounter the Lord. And then on the cross, he actually says, Father,
my God, still personal,
my God,
possessive.
He says, into your hands I commit my spirit, where it's, in some ways, it's just that full surrender to your will. Father, give me today. I'm on the cross. I'm breathing my last. I don't have anything left. Into your hands I commit my spirit. It's like, give me what I need, whatever you see fit. And God didn't save him from death, but God did resurrect him, which is really good news. God did give him that, and so we get to celebrate that resurrection. But just Jesus modeling that prayer was really, really kind of like evocative for me in some ways. There's parts of my life that are anguish, or there are things that feel like, they're killing me or whatever. And in those moments to just, still the same format of prayer, starting with Daddy, dealing with his will and my will, but then also feeling free to say, please give us this. Like, I want what you want because you know what I don't know, but at the same time, I'm still just a kid, and I really would like you to heal my friend, or give me this thing, or get me out of this situation, and you see fit.
I think in that daily bread, one of the things you did in the sermon was talk about manna, and which Jesus is connecting to the history of Israel and telling their story to him when he's doing that, and like praying this way, and it's connecting them to the story they've lived in as a nation. And I think that's powerful that you did that in terms of, yes, this is not an accident that he's alluding to the bread in the wilderness, and Jesus was called the bread of life, and just all of those things.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, because it just lands it exactly where you were. But what was the book I read? Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, which is actually like somewhere between a book and a commentary. But I remember in his commentary on that, it was interesting that actually the word daily, maybe you know more about this than I can remember from the book, but that word daily is actually a bit of a like, not exactly clear what the heck that's talking about.
It's the only place they can find it in any literature. So it's,
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. So there is actually a pretty big question mark as to what it is, but at least from this guy's conclusion, it like, and so there's a number of, it could kind of mean this, it could kind of mean that, it could kind of mean this, but best guess is, obviously the reason we translate it daily bread, but best guess is it's talking about pretty much exactly what you preached on, like no more, no less. Like, not so much that you're starving, not so much that you're tempted by gluttony, but just what you need for today.
Yeah.
Don't store up for tomorrow.
Yeah, the literal translation is needed.
Yeah.
Give us this day our needed bread.
Yeah.
And daily.
That sounds like a pun. It's a multilingual
needed,
pun.
No, with a K. Dang, man, Dan's on fire today. But yeah, no, I think this is, I'm really excited about, continuing on in this. Diving into the Lord's Prayer and having that be kind of undergirding us as we go through this whole prayer and fasting season. But yeah, we do just want to encourage everyone to lean into this time. Prayer again, prayer and fasting is a great combo. But prayer really it's the end all be all. And Jesus gave us a good roadmap for prayer. You can do lots of more studies into there. It's interesting, as I was diving in, we were talking earlier about the Didache. I say that one right? The Didache, 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 is this thing that was discovered in the 1800s, but it's dated back to what they're saying is even as early as the 1st century, which we're talking about not too far away from Jesus when you're getting into the first century. And it was basically, they called it the teaching of the 12 apostles, or an early Christian manual that provides instructions for the Christian community. And I hadn't really, interacted with it much, and was just started reading. And it's a practical guide, but it talks a little bit about, the Lord's Prayer, and then it talks about a whole lot of other practices that are a part of, the Christian rhythms, and it literally like a manual. Like here's the standard operating procedures for a Christian or for a church. And it's fun to think about. They were interpreting the apostles' doctrine at that point, and they were coming up with stuff that's very, very similar to what we're doing today, which is encouraging. And so we can always glean from people and the stuff that has gone before us. And it's not inspired; it's not the Word of God. But again, it's nice to hear what other Christians have come up with and what was helpful for them. And that's a bit of what spiritual practices are. These are just proven things since the beginning of time. People just like us have been wrestling with the conclusions they've come to, how they were able to help themselves pray, how they were able to get more meaningful prayers and prayer interactions. And so I'd encourage you to do some research, to do some study. Do you guys have any go-tos on like books on prayer or kind of apps for prayer or anything like that?
Yeah, well, we definitely, we have on our website, livingstreams.org/library, I think. We have our recommended reading list, which you can navigate to there too. And there's
some books on prayer.
There's a tab on prayer for sure. So you can check that out. Pete Greig is pretty great.
Yeah.
If you want to get fired up, for sure. His book, Red Moon Rising, will get you wanting to pray a bunch. His book God on Mute will be is the book for why isn't God answering my prayer, in my opinion. Other than the Bible.
Praying like monk, living like fools.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, was that him, or that's
not him.
That's
from Chicago.
Well,
he's
at Bridgetown
now. Yeah,
I forget his name.
And trying to think any other. Anything by Henry Nouwen. The Way of the Heart would be my go-to there.
Yeah,
I'd say.
There's a Eugene Peterson, Answering God. Like if you like praying through Psalms, that's kind of a nice starting place. It's kind of a nice one that I've liked. I would just say, at the bottom of spiritual practice is, you were alluding to it earlier, talking about it earlier, like at the bottom of it is desire. What do you want? And it's not what you say you want or what you should say you want, but what you actually want. And sometimes we notice in ourselves, this is what I should want, this is what I do want. How do I get from what I do want to what I should want? And the thing that closes that gap or changes that is the spiritual practices that form our desires. So it's not... We're not here to get rid of desire. We're here to shape our desire in a way that's
if
meaningful.
We're formed by desire, how do we form our desires?
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, there was a book what was it called?
And Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer is a great kind of, it's not just on prayer, but it's like a holistic look into some of the way that we're forming our desires. And
I'm spacing the name of it, but it's something about liturgies for the ordinary life or something. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, my daughter really liked that one. She's had
called, but
liturgies of ordinary places or something
like that. I can't remember.
Oh yeah. But it's a female author.
No, different. I might be saying the wrong.
Then there's another one, Sacred Rhythms by Ruth Haley Barton.
No, I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But it was about like rhythms and liturgies and really spiritual practices for your family. And the author had tons of solid one-liners, and I think his main one-liner, which was kind of the premise of the whole book, was he was saying he said you form your children, and your practice and your habits form you. That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
And I thought,
the liturgy of the ordinary.
Okay, yeah.
Sacred practices in every day. And this is a lady who's a mom.
That one comes highly recommended from my daughter.
Yeah, and she's a mom, and she's basically saying, okay, well, I can't go spend 3 hours in prayer at some monastery. I can't go, I got babies, I got laundry, but she's been able to find some rhythms even in that. So it could be a good resource if you're listening. That's your situation in life right now. But I've been looking at Tim Keller a lot. I've been using him to kind of guide me through this study. Just found a lot of rich stuff already, but he wrote a book on prayer, Awakening Intimacies, or what is...
I think he has a couple.
It's called
maybe,
Awe and Intimacy with God.
Okay, I haven't read that one.
So you can always check that out as well. But with that being said, we'll be back next week talking about forgiveness. Woo! That might be the most challenging thing there is in the life of a believer. But we'll talk about forgive us our debts, forgive us our trespasses next week on the podcast and this Sunday coming up. But if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have some resources that you've really loved, shoot those our way and we can try and get those out there as well. But like, subscribe, share, and dislike, even if you want to dislike it. That's fine too, But we're so thankful for the time. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Alec. Thanks, Dalton.
Thank you guys.
And we'll catch you guys next time. Adios.